The day the sacred tree speaks, every throne must listen. No one in Ash Hollow believed those words anymore. The ancient saying had become little more than a bedtime story whispered to wolf pups before sleep, a forgotten legend buried beneath generations of pride, politics, and fear. Yet on the morning Eloan Ashcroft was cast out from her own pack, destiny quietly awakened beneath roots older than memory. A cold autumn breeze drifted through the towering pines surrounding the sacred grove, carrying golden leaves across the worn stone path as dozens of wolves gathered for what should have been an ordinary judgment. Eloan stood alone in the center of the clearing, her simple gray dress fluttering softly around her ankles while every familiar face avoided her eyes. At 21, she had learned that rejection rarely arrived all at once. It came one silent glance after another, one whispered rumor after another, until even kindness became something people forgot to offer. Her wolf had never displayed the fierce dominance admired by the elders. She possessed no remarkable strength, no celebrated lineage, and no powerful scent that turned heads during the coming-of-age ceremonies. To many, she was simply the Omega everyone wished belonged somewhere else. Elder Bramwell stepped forward, resting both hands upon his carved staff. His voice echoed across the grove with practiced authority. Eloan Ashcroft, by the decision of the council, your presence brings uncertainty to this pack. You are released from your place among us. Released. Such a gentle word for being abandoned. Eloan lowered her eyes, refusing to let anyone see the disappointment rising inside her chest. She had spent years trying harder than everyone expected. She gathered herbs before sunrise, cared for injured pups, tended elderly wolves through long winters, and quietly completed every task given to her without complaint. Somehow none of it had ever been enough. Around the clearing, conversations resumed almost immediately, as though her life had already become yesterday's news. Mothers guided their children away. Young warriors exchanged relieved smiles. Even those who once accepted her kindness remained silent. The silence hurt more than anger ever could. She turned toward the ancient stone gate marking the edge of pack territory. One final walk, she thought. One final goodbye to the only home she had ever known. As she stepped onto the narrow path leading past the sacred tree, the entire forest seemed unusually still. Birds stopped singing. Wind faded into silence. Even the branches overhead appeared frozen beneath the pale morning sky. Eloan slowed without understanding why. Before her stood the sacred tree itself, its enormous silver-white trunk rising nearly 80 feet into the heavens. Legends claimed it had witnessed every Alpha King since the first moon. Its bark shimmered faintly beneath shafts of sunlight, while countless crystal-like leaves reflected soft shades of silver and green. No living wolf had ever seen it respond to anyone. Elders often claimed the tree had fallen asleep centuries ago. Eloan offered it one small smile anyway. I suppose this is goodbye, she whispered. She reached out with hesitant fingers and gently rested her palm against the cool bark. Nothing happened. She laughed quietly at herself, embarrassed for expecting anything else. Then warmth spread beneath her hand. Not heat, not magic that frightened the senses. It felt like recognition, like returning somewhere she had forgotten she belonged. A single silver leaf loosened from the highest branch. It drifted slowly through the motionless air, untouched by any breeze, floating in graceful circles before landing softly in her open palm. At that exact moment, light rippled through every branch. Thousands of shimmering leaves glowed like moonlight reflected across a quiet lake. Gasps echoed behind her. Wolves who had already begun walking away stopped in place. Elder Bramwell turned sharply, his confident expression disappearing for the first time in decades. The roots beneath the sacred tree pulsed with gentle silver light, spreading across the earth in delicate patterns no one had seen before. Eloan stepped backward in disbelief. I didn't do anything. No one answered. The oldest wolves stared at the glowing tree with trembling hands. Several dropped to one knee without realizing it. Others exchanged frightened looks, unable to explain what their own eyes witnessed. Somewhere deep inside the forest, an ancient bell rang by itself. Once, then again, then a third time. Its sound rolled across valleys and mountains far beyond Ash Hollow, carrying a message older than kingdoms themselves. Hidden beneath layers of dust inside distant castles, Forgotten maps trembled upon wooden tables. Somewhere beyond 3 great kingdoms, a king whose silver eyes had searched countless horizons slowly lifted his head toward the northern sky, as though he had just heard a voice no one else could hear. The silver light faded as gently as it had appeared, yet the silence surrounding the sacred tree only grew heavier. Eloan looked down at the single shimmering leaf resting in her palm, almost expecting it to disappear like a dream at sunrise. Instead, it remained cool against her skin, its delicate veins glowing with a faint pulse that matched the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. She slowly lifted her eyes toward the gathered wolves. Moments earlier they had watched her with quiet indifference. Now every face carried a different emotion. Some looked confused. Others appeared frightened. A few simply stared as though the impossible had stepped into the middle of their ordinary lives. Elder Bramwell recovered first. His weathered face hardened beneath years of practiced authority as he raised one hand for silence. "No one speaks of what happened here," he declared firmly. "The sacred tree has stood for centuries. Strange lights do not change our laws." Murmurs spread through the crowd, but none dared challenge him openly. Another elder stepped closer to the glowing trunk, cautiously placing both hands against the ancient bark. His eyes widened. "The pulse is real," he whispered. "The roots are awake." Bramwell shot him a warning glance before turning back toward Eloan. "Leave this place immediately." Eloan tightened her fingers around the silver leaf. She wanted answers more than anyone standing there, yet every instinct told her they would not be given freely. Without another word, she stepped beyond the sacred grove and followed the narrow trail leading away from Ash Hollow. Behind her, the forest remained strangely quiet, as though every tree watched her departure. She walked until the familiar sounds of the village disappeared behind rolling hills covered in amber grass. The afternoon sun drifted lower across the sky, painting long shadows over the winding road. For the first time in years, no one expected anything from her. No chores waited. No whispered judgment followed her footsteps. Freedom should have felt comforting. Instead, it felt unfamiliar, like a home she had never visited before. As evening approached, she reached a small stream that reflected the fading colors of sunset. Kneeling beside the water, she studied her reflection. The same ash-blonde hair framed her face. The same gray-blue eyes stared back at her. Nothing about her appearance explained why an ancient tree had awakened. "Who am I?" she whispered softly. The only answer came from the gentle ripple of moving water. Far away, hidden within the great library beneath Frosthaven Castle, dust drifted from forgotten shelves as an elderly keeper hurried through narrow stone corridors carrying an ancient scroll. His hands trembled while he placed it before a tall man standing beside an open window overlooking snow-covered mountains. King Calen Thornmere had spent years carrying the quiet weight of a crown that demanded constant certainty, yet the sound of the distant bells had stirred something he had not felt since childhood. Hope. The keeper carefully unrolled the brittle parchment. Faded silver ink revealed an illustration of an enormous tree surrounded by kneeling wolves. At its center stood a young woman holding a single glowing leaf. Beneath the drawing, words written in the oldest language of the kingdoms stretched across the page. The keeper translated slowly. "When the sacred tree chooses once more, the chosen soul shall walk alone before the rightful king finds her. Delay shall weaken the roots. Pride shall blind the packs. Only humility shall reveal the path." Calen remained silent for several long moments, his silver eyes fixed upon the ancient illustration. "How old is this record?" he finally asked. "Nearly 800 years, Your Majesty." And no one believed it. The keeper offered a weary smile. Legends are easiest to ignore while they remain quiet. Outside the castle, another bell echoed across the frozen valley. Calen closed the scroll with deliberate care. "Prepare no royal procession," he said calmly. "No banners. No announcements." The keeper looked surprised. "You intend to travel yourself?" Calen nodded once. "If destiny truly called someone today, I will not send strangers to greet her." Hundreds of miles away, beneath a sky slowly filling with stars, Eloan wrapped her cloak around her shoulders as she settled beneath the branches of an old oak tree beside the road. She did not know that 3 kingdoms had already begun shifting because of a single silver leaf resting safely within her hands. Morning arrived beneath a sky washed in pale gold, But the warmth of sunrise never quite reached the lonely road where Aloan continued her journey. Dew clung to the tall grass surrounding the narrow trail, sparkling like tiny stars before fading beneath the growing light. She adjusted the worn strap of her small satchel and glanced once more at the silver leaf tucked safely inside. It had not withered overnight. Instead, its gentle glow remained steady, almost as if it quietly reminded her that the previous day had truly happened. Every sensible part of her mind searched for an explanation, yet none appeared. She had always believed extraordinary things belonged to extraordinary wolves. She was neither. By midday, the forest slowly gave way to rolling farmland dotted with modest cottages and weathered fences. Farmers prepared winter fields while children laughed beside small creeks, completely unaware that ancient prophecies had begun unfolding beyond their peaceful lives. Aloan smiled as she passed them, careful not to draw attention to herself. She had spent so many years trying not to become anyone's burden that disappearing into ordinary places came naturally. Near the edge of a quiet village, she noticed an elderly woman struggling to gather bundles of herbs that had scattered across the road after a sudden gust of wind. Without hesitation, Aloan knelt beside her, carefully collecting each fragrant stem before placing them back into the woven basket. The woman looked up with grateful eyes. "Thank you, child. Most travelers hurry past these days." Aloan returned the basket with a gentle smile. "Someone once taught me that kindness should never depend on convenience." The elderly woman studied her for a long moment before noticing the faint silver glow peeking from the edge of Aloan's satchel. Her expression shifted ever so slightly, though she asked no questions. Instead, she reached into her apron and handed Aloan a small loaf of fresh bread. "The road ahead is longer than it looks," she said quietly. "Keep your heart open, even when others close theirs." Aloan accepted the gift with sincere gratitude before continuing onward, unaware that the old woman remained standing long after she disappeared beyond the hill. Back in Ash Hollow, however, peace had already begun slipping away. The sacred grove no longer felt alive with quiet harmony. Every few hours another cluster of silver leaves drifted silently to the ground. The once vibrant glow beneath the roots had faded to little more than a weak shimmer. Elders gathered around the enormous trunk, exchanging anxious whispers that none of the younger wolves were allowed to hear. Bramwell rested his hand against the bark once again. The pulse felt weaker than before. "She took something with her," one elder murmured nervously. Another shook his head. "No, the tree gave something willingly." Bramwell's jaw tightened. "Then no one outside this pack learns of it. If neighboring kingdoms hear that the sacred tree has awakened, every throne will interfere with our affairs." Yet despite his command, the mysterious bells had already carried their message farther than any rider could travel. In Frosthaven Castle, King Kaelin Thornmere stood within the royal observatory while maps covered an enormous oak table before him. Colored pins marked mountain passes, trade roads, forgotten shrines, and hidden forest trails stretching across 3 kingdoms. His closest advisor entered quietly, surprised to find the king dressed not in ceremonial robes, but in simple traveling clothes beneath a heavy charcoal cloak. "Your Majesty," the advisor said carefully, "the council has assembled for today's audience." Kaelin gently rolled up the ancient map instead. "They will manage without me." "Without explanation? Tell them only that I have gone where the old laws require." The advisor hesitated. "Do you truly believe one unknown Omega could matter so greatly?" Kaelin's silver eyes lifted toward the distant northern horizon visible through the observatory windows. "I believe the sacred tree has remained silent for centuries. If it chose to speak yesterday, then every wise ruler should begin listening today." Before another question could be asked, he secured the map inside a leather case and stepped into the courtyard where only 3 trusted companions waited with saddled horses. No royal banners fluttered above them. No soldiers lined the gates. The journey ahead would not begin with the pride of a king, but with the patience of a traveler searching for someone the world had overlooked. Hundreds of miles away, Aloan paused atop a gentle hillside as evening painted the distant mountains with shades of violet and amber. A cool breeze brushed against her face, carrying the scent of pine from lands she had never seen before. She had no destination, no promise of welcome, and no idea that somewhere beyond those distant peaks, a king had already begun following the quiet trail left behind by a single silver leaf. The mountains grew larger with every passing mile, their blue-gray peaks rising above endless forests like silent guardians watching over forgotten secrets. Aloan followed the winding trade road until the sounds of civilization slowly faded behind her. She had stopped counting the hours since leaving Ash Hollow because time no longer felt measured by the position of the sun. Instead, it was measured by each unfamiliar place she discovered and every small act of kindness that reminded her the world was far larger than the narrow life she had left behind. Near sunset, she reached a quiet crossroads where an old stone well stood beneath a weathered maple tree. Several travelers rested nearby, sharing bread and warm cider before continuing toward different kingdoms. Aloan kept to herself, choosing a shaded spot beside the well while enjoying the simple loaf the elderly woman had given her the day before. As she reached into her satchel, the silver leaf shimmered once again. Its gentle glow reflected across the surface of the water, drawing the attention of a little girl filling a wooden bucket. The child tilted her head with innocent curiosity. "Your leaf is beautiful," she whispered. Aloan smiled softly and closed the satchel before anyone else noticed. "It was a gift," she answered honestly, although she still did not understand who had truly given it. The little girl nodded as though that simple explanation made perfect sense before returning to her family. Watching the child laugh filled Aloan with an unexpected warmth. For the first time in many years, she imagined a future that was not defined by rejection. Somewhere beyond the western mountains, King Kalen Thornmere guided his horse along an ancient forest trail that appeared on almost no modern map. His 3 trusted companions followed several yards behind, allowing long stretches of peaceful silence. They knew their king well enough to recognize when his thoughts had traveled far beyond the road beneath them. Late that afternoon, they arrived at the ruins of an abandoned shrine where vines climbed cracked marble columns and wildflowers bloomed between broken stones. At the center stood an ancient monument carved with the same silver tree that appeared within the forgotten scroll. Kalen dismounted and brushed away centuries of moss covering the inscription beneath the carving. Time had erased many of the words, but one sentence remained perfectly preserved. "The chosen heart will never seek the crown, yet the worthy crown must seek the chosen heart." One of his companions stepped closer. "Your Majesty, perhaps the prophecy speaks symbolically." Kalen slowly traced the ancient letters with his fingertips. "Perhaps. But symbols often become history when ignored for too long." As they prepared to continue their journey, a pair of white birds lifted gracefully from the branches overhead and circled once before flying toward the southeastern horizon. The oldest companion watched them disappear. "An unusual direction this late in the season," he observed quietly. Kalen looked toward the distant sky. "Then we follow." Far behind them, unrest continued spreading through Ash Hollow. The sacred tree no longer shed only a few silver leaves. Entire branches had begun losing their radiant color, leaving patches of pale gray where shimmering life once flourished. Wolves who had visited the sacred grove since childhood whispered nervously among themselves, wondering whether the tree itself mourned someone who had departed. Elder Bramwell refused every suggestion that they search for Aloan. Instead, he ordered the grove closed and declared that no outsider should witness the changes. Yet the more tightly he tried to contain the truth, the more restless the forest became. Animals abandoned familiar nesting grounds. Streams that once flowed beside the sacred grove slowed to little more than quiet trickles. Even the evening wind seemed reluctant to pass through branches that had stood vibrant for centuries. Miles away, unaware of the growing concern behind her, Aloan reached a peaceful valley where a modest village prepared for the annual Harvest Lantern Festival. Warm lights stretched across wooden porches while neighbors decorated streets with hand-carved lanterns shaped like stars, leaves, and moons. The cheerful atmosphere felt wonderfully unfamiliar after years spent believing she belonged nowhere. An elderly baker noticed her standing quietly at the edge of the celebration and welcomed her with a gentle smile. "Every traveler deserves a warm meal before nightfall," he said. Grateful beyond words, Aloan accepted the invitation. As music drifted through the crisp evening air and families gathered beneath glowing lanterns, She felt something she had almost forgotten existed. Hope. Yet as darkness settled across the valley, the silver leaf inside her satchel brightened more than ever before, casting a soft glow through the fabric, while far beyond the hills, King Kalen suddenly lifted his head, feeling the same quiet pull leading both of them toward a meeting neither one could yet imagine. The Harvest Lantern Festival slowly faded into memory as Aloan continued east through Green Hollow Valley, where the crisp autumn air carried the scent of cedar and fresh earth after an early morning rain. She had traveled nearly 12 miles before reaching a quiet stretch of road winding between rolling hills brushed with golden autumn grass. The silence no longer reminded her of loneliness. It reminded her that the world was finally wide enough to discover who she truly was. As she rounded a gentle bend, she noticed an elegant carriage resting beneath an ancient oak tree. One wheel had sunk deeply into soft earth left by the night's rain, while two attendants struggled unsuccessfully to free it. Beside the carriage stood an elderly gentleman leaning upon a polished walking cane. Though his silver hair and refined posture hinted at remarkable dignity, he waited with patient calm rather than frustration. Aloan quietly approached and offered a warm smile. "May I help?" One of the attendants sighed with visible relief. "We have been trying for almost an hour." The older gentleman regarded her thoughtfully before nodding. Kindness offered before being asked is becoming a rare gift. Working together, they gathered flat stones and carefully positioned them beneath the trapped wheel. Rather than forcing the horses forward, Aloan suggested guiding them gently while shifting the weight little by little. Within moments, the carriage rolled smoothly back onto solid ground. The attendants exchanged grateful laughter, but the elderly traveler remained unusually quiet, studying the young woman before him with thoughtful gray eyes. As he prepared to climb into the carriage, he briefly lost his balance. Aloan instinctively reached out and steadied him. She noticed how cold his hands felt despite the mild afternoon. "There is a spring less than half a mile ahead beneath a grove of white birch," she said softly. "You should rest there before continuing. Long roads ask for patience more than strength." The gentleman smiled with genuine appreciation. "You speak as though life has already taught you lessons most people spend decades avoiding." Aloan lowered her eyes modestly. "Sometimes kindness is the only thing we can still choose after everything else has been taken away." The words lingered between them. The old traveler remained silent for several moments before quietly asking, "If the world remembered you many years from now, what would you hope it remembered?" She answered without hesitation, "That I tried to leave people a little better than I found them." A slow smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Remarkable," he whispered, almost to himself. "Not once have you spoken about what you deserve." He reached inside his coat and removed a finely crafted silver token engraved with the image of an ancient oak leaf surrounded by delicate runes. "Please accept this." Aloan immediately shook her head. "I cannot take something so valuable." He gently closed her fingers around it. "This token has opened many doors during my lifetime. One day it may open another for someone worthy of carrying it." As their hands touched, the silver leaf hidden inside Aloan's satchel emitted a faint pulse of light. The engraved runes upon the token answered with the same quiet glow before fading almost instantly. Neither attendant seemed to notice, but the elderly gentleman did. For the first time since they met, genuine astonishment crossed his face. He carefully looked toward the satchel without asking what rested inside it. Instead, he bowed his head with unexpected respect. "Safe travels, Mississippi." Aloan smiled warmly before continuing east, believing she had simply helped another weary traveler. She never learned that the gentleman was Chancellor Aldrin Whitlock, Royal High Judge, and the oldest surviving advisor to every king across the three kingdoms. Few people recognized him when he traveled without ceremonial robes, and he preferred it that way. As the carriage resumed its journey, one nervous attendant finally whispered, "Your Excellency, I have never seen you bow to a stranger." Whitlock kept his eyes fixed upon the distant road where Aloan gradually disappeared beyond the hills. "Neither have I," he replied quietly, "but I have spent 60 years studying every surviving record of the sacred tree." The younger attendant frowned with confusion. "Do you believe?" Whitlock slowly opened his hand, revealing another oak token identical to the one he had just given away. Its ancient runes remained completely dark. Royal tokens only awaken in the presence of those chosen by the first grove, he said softly. Mine has slept for decades. Hers answered without being asked. The carriage fell silent. Hours later, they reached a royal relay station where another lone traveler had stopped to water his horse beneath the fading afternoon sun. King Kaelan Thornmere looked up the moment Chancellor Whitlock stepped from the carriage. Recognition and mutual respect passed quietly between them. Your Majesty, Whitlock greeted him warmly. I believe our journeys have finally found the same destination. Kaelan's silver eyes sharpened immediately. You met her? The old Chancellor nodded. I expected to meet the woman spoken of in legends. A gentle smile crossed his weathered face. Instead, I met someone even rarer. Kaelan remained perfectly still. Whitlock continued. She repaired my carriage before learning my name. She refused every reward. She spoke of helping strangers as though kindness required no witness. And when I placed an ancient royal token in her hand, he paused, allowing the weight of the moment to settle between them. It awakened for the first time in over 60 years. For the first time since leaving Frosthaven, genuine emotion flickered across Kaelan's calm expression. Whitlock pointed toward the southeastern road, disappearing into the distant forests. She left less than 2 hours ago. Go now, Your Majesty. Every hour matters. Legends can wait for centuries. Kind hearts should never have to. Without another word, Kaelan mounted his horse. As he rode toward the fading horizon, dust rose behind him beneath the setting sun, while a single silver leaf drifted silently across the empty road, faithfully guiding both destinies one step closer to the moment the three kingdoms had unknowingly awaited for 800 years. The road leading into Silverbrook Forest seemed unusually peaceful that afternoon, wrapped in soft shafts of golden sunlight filtering through towering pines that had watched over travelers for centuries. Eloan walked at an unhurried pace, the silver leaf and the small oak token resting together inside her satchel. Ever since meeting the elderly traveler, she had felt a quiet certainty she could not explain, as though every act of kindness she had offered along the road had gently woven together into something larger than herself. The forest greeted her with birdsong, cool mountain air, and the comforting scent of cedar carried by the breeze. After several miles, she reached a crystal spring flowing beneath an ancient stone bridge. Clear water tumbled gently over smooth rocks before disappearing into a narrow stream bordered by white wildflowers. It seemed like the perfect place to rest before sunset. She knelt beside the spring and filled her small canteen. As she lifted it, she noticed another reflection beside her own shimmering across the water. Someone had quietly approached from the opposite side of the bridge. She looked up to see a tall traveler leading a dark bay horse by its reins. His charcoal cloak showed the dust of many days on the road, and although there was nothing extravagant about his appearance, he carried himself with calm confidence that immediately put others at ease. He offered a courteous smile before speaking. I hope I am not interrupting your afternoon. Eloan returned the smile. Not at all. There is enough water here for everyone. The stranger laughed softly. That sounds like something very few people would say these days. He knelt several feet away to refill his own flask, careful to leave her comfortable space. For a few quiet moments, neither of them spoke, simply listening to the gentle sound of flowing water. Finally, he glanced toward the small satchel resting beside her. You have been traveling alone for quite some time, have you not? She nodded, long enough to discover that strangers are often kinder than familiar faces. His expression grew thoughtful. That is an unusual lesson. Perhaps, she replied, but it has proven true more than once. He smiled, recognizing a quiet resilience beneath her gentle words. May I ask where your journey ends? Eloan looked toward the winding forest trail disappearing beyond the trees and answered honestly. I do not know yet. The traveler seemed neither surprised nor concerned. Sometimes the road knows before we do. She laughed quietly for the first time in several days. You speak as though you have spent your life traveling. In many ways, I have. They shared simple bread beside the spring while exchanging stories about villages, mountain roads, and the small kindnesses offered by strangers along the way. Eloan noticed that although he asked thoughtful questions, he never spoke about wealth, status, or power. Instead, he seemed genuinely interested in the people she had met. The baker who shared his supper, he asked. Why do you think he trusted you so quickly? She considered the question before answering. Perhaps because kindness makes people feel remembered. He nodded slowly, almost as though her words confirmed something he had hoped to hear. A sudden breeze stirred the forest canopy, carrying a single silver leaf from Aloan's satchel without her noticing. It drifted quietly into the air before floating toward the traveler. He watched it with unmistakable recognition, though he said nothing. Moments later, the sound of approaching horses echoed through the trees. 3 mounted riders emerged from the forest trail before quickly dismounting as soon as they spotted the traveler. Without hesitation, each placed a hand over his heart and respectfully bowed his head. "Your Majesty," the oldest companion said with visible relief, "we finally found you." Aloan's eyes widened in complete surprise. She slowly turned toward the man beside the spring, suddenly understanding why his quiet confidence had felt so natural. He was not merely another traveler. He was King Kaelan Thornmere. Embarrassed, she immediately stood and lowered her head. "Your Majesty, I did not realize." Before she could finish, Kaelan gently interrupted her with a warm smile. "I was hoping you would not." She looked at him with quiet confusion. "Why?" He stepped a little closer, though still leaving respectful distance between them. "Because I wanted our first conversation to belong to 2 ordinary travelers, not to a king and someone who felt she needed to measure every word." Aloan remained silent, deeply moved by his honesty. Kaelan reached into his saddlebag and carefully unfolded the ancient parchment he had carried across 3 kingdoms. Beside the faded drawing of the sacred tree rested another silver leaf identical to the one now floating peacefully between them. He looked into her gray-blue eyes with calm certainty before speaking the words that had carried him across mountains, rivers, and countless miles of open road. "I have crossed 3 kingdoms searching for the woman the sacred tree chose. After speaking with you today, I finally understand that the prophecy was never about power. It was always about the heart strong enough to remain kind after the world gave it every reason not to be." The journey north unfolded beneath brilliant autumn skies, yet neither Aloan nor King Kaelan felt hurried any longer. The same road that had once carried a frightened young Omega away from everything she had ever known now carried her home beside the man who had crossed 3 kingdoms without demanding anything in return. Most days they chose to walk instead of ride, allowing long stretches of peaceful silence to become conversations all their own. Along forgotten roads they greeted merchants, comforted weary travelers, and shared meals beside quiet campfires. Again and again, Kaelan noticed something remarkable. No matter where they stopped, strangers naturally trusted Aloan before learning her name. She remembered every child she met, listened before offering advice, and quietly left every place warmer than she had found it. Watching her, Kaelan finally understood why no ancient prophecy had ever described the chosen one by power, beauty, or bloodline. Kindness had always been the rarest strength of all. Several mornings later, the familiar stone gate of Ash Hollow appeared through drifting mist. Aloan slowed almost instinctively. Memories returned with every step. She remembered crossing that same gate believing no one would ever search for her. Today she returned not to reclaim a place she had lost, but to discover whether forgiveness could grow where rejection once stood. News of the Northern King's arrival had already spread across neighboring packs. Wolves filled the sacred grove long before Aloan reached its center. Curious whispers rippled through the gathering as they watched the young Omega walk beside the Alpha King with quiet confidence rather than fear. Elder Bramwell stepped forward, his carved staff trembling almost imperceptibly. He opened his mouth to welcome the king, but the words never came. Kaelan acknowledged him with a respectful nod before stepping aside, making it unmistakably clear that this moment belonged to Aloan alone. She slowly approached the sacred tree. The once magnificent silver canopy still carried patches of fading gray where life had quietly slipped away during her absence. The entire grove fell silent. Even the wind seemed unwilling to disturb the moment. Aloan rested one gentle hand against the ancient bark. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then warmth flowed beneath her fingertips, stronger than before, spreading through every root like a heartbeat returning after a long sleep. Brilliant silver light raced upward through the colossal trunk before exploding across every branch. Thousands upon thousands of radiant leaves burst into motion, swirling above the sacred grove like living starlight. Every faded branch bloomed once again with shimmering silver blossoms despite the autumn season. Crystal streams that had nearly disappeared began flowing with renewed life around the roots. Gasps echoed throughout the clearing. An elderly she-wolf covered her mouth as tears rolled freely down her cheeks. "I have waited my entire life to see this," she whispered. Several young warriors instinctively lowered themselves onto one knee without understanding why. Others simply stared, unable to reconcile what their own eyes witnessed. Elder Bramwell stood frozen before the restored tree. For decades he had believed himself its faithful guardian. Now he realized he had nearly driven away the very soul it had patiently awaited across generations. His voice trembled with emotion. 40 years, he whispered. I devoted 40 years to protecting this sacred place. Yet I almost sent away the one it had been waiting for all along. He slowly lowered himself to one knee before Aloan, placing his carved staff upon the earth. Forgive an old wolf who mistook tradition for wisdom. The entire grove remained silent. Aloan looked down at the elder whose judgment had once broken her heart. There was no anger left inside her, only quiet understanding. The tree never stopped giving life, she answered gently. Perhaps neither should we. Her words carried neither accusation nor triumph. They carried grace. One by one, wolves throughout the sacred grove followed Bramwell's example until the clearing became a sea of bowed heads. Not because a king commanded them, not because ancient laws required them. They knelt because kindness had accomplished what authority never could. Standing quietly behind Aloan, Chancellor Aldrin Whitlock stepped forward for the first time since arriving with the royal delegation. He reached into his robe and removed the second ancient oak token he had carried for decades. Its engraved runes, dark and lifeless only days before, now shone with the same gentle silver light flowing through the sacred tree. He looked toward Aloan and smiled knowingly. 800 years, he murmured. Neither token awakened because of power. They awakened because they finally came home. Aloan instinctively reached into her satchel and withdrew the token Whitlock had given her beside the lonely roadside. Its silver runes answered immediately, glowing brighter until both ancient tokens floated gently from their hands. They rose together toward the sacred tree before settling naturally into two empty hollows hidden within the great trunk, as though they had always belonged there. A deep, resonant pulse echoed through the earth. The entire grove trembled softly beneath everyone's feet. High above, at the very highest branch of the sacred tree, a single blossom unlike any other slowly unfolded. Unlike the thousands below, its petals shimmered with both silver and soft golden light. Every wolf instinctively looked upward. Even Kalen felt his breath catch. The oldest legends had spoken of such a blossom only once. It did not announce that the prophecy had ended. It announced that a new age had quietly begun. Then, from somewhere beyond the northern mountains, a lone wolf's distant howl rose into the morning sky. Another answered from the east, then another from the west. Before long, voices echoed from every kingdom until the sound rolled across valleys, forests, and ancient castles alike. The sacred tree had spoken once more, and for the first time in 800 years, every throne in the three kingdoms listened. The forest remained perfectly still after Kalen's words settled into the quiet night, as though even the ancient trees understood that something far older than either of them had just begun. Aloan searched his face, expecting to find pride, authority, or even certainty, yet she found only sincerity. The stranger standing before her spoke with the calm humility of someone who had spent many days listening instead of commanding. She lowered her eyes briefly before asking the question that had quietly formed inside her heart. Who are you? Kalen smiled gently, removing the travel cloak from his shoulders without ceremony. Beneath it, he wore simple riding clothes marked by dust from countless miles on the road rather than royal finery. Around his neck rested a small silver crest shaped like a crescent wolf, worn smooth by years rather than polished for display. My name is Kalen Thornmere, he answered softly. I serve the Northern Kingdom. Aloan recognized the name immediately. Stories about King Kalen had traveled far beyond his borders. Some described him as wise. Others called him the strongest alpha of his generation. None had prepared her for the quiet kindness in his voice. She instinctively stepped back, uncertain how to respond. "Your Majesty," she whispered, lowering her head respectfully. Kalen immediately shook his head. "Tonight, I am only a traveler who hoped to find the woman the sacred tree chose." His words left her even more confused. "There must be some mistake. I am only an Omega who was sent away by her own pack. I have no special gift. I have no title. I have nothing worthy of a king's journey." Kalen looked toward the crystal spring where the moon reflected upon the calm water. "That is exactly why I believe the prophecy." She frowned slightly. "I do not understand." He knelt beside the spring and gently placed the ancient map upon a smooth stone between them. The faded drawing of the sacred tree shimmered beneath the moonlight. Beside it appeared words written in a language Aloan could not read. "For centuries," Kalen explained, "many believed the prophecies spoke of a queen, a ruler, or someone born into greatness. They searched noble families, royal bloodlines, and powerful packs. They forgot that true greatness rarely announces itself." Aloan listened quietly while the silver leaf inside her satchel began glowing once more. Its gentle light spread across the old parchment, revealing another line of hidden writing that neither of them had seen before. The faded letters slowly appeared as though awakened by the leaf itself. Kalen read them aloud with quiet amazement. "The chosen shall never be measured by strength alone. The sacred tree seeks the heart that gives without asking to receive." Aloan felt tears gathering in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that every small kindness she had offered throughout her life had mattered more than she had ever believed. The moments she thought were insignificant had become the very path that led her here. A gentle breeze swept across the clearing, carrying silver leaves that circled them without touching the ground. The crystal spring responded with soft ripples, and the water slowly brightened until it reflected not only the stars above, but also the outline of the sacred tree standing hundreds of miles away. Its once fading branches now carried faint traces of renewed light. Kalen watched the vision carefully. "The tree is responding to you even from this distance." Aloan shook her head. "Then I should return immediately." He looked at her with quiet understanding. "Perhaps, but the prophecy never says the tree commands you. It only says the tree chooses you." She looked at him with uncertainty. "Is there a difference?" Kalen nodded. "A great one. Choice given freely becomes hope. Choice demanded becomes fear. I crossed 3 kingdoms because I wanted you to know something before anyone else tried to decide your future." He stood and met her eyes with complete sincerity. "Whatever happens next will be your decision. Not mine. Not the elders. Not any kings. If you wish to return to the sacred grove, I will walk beside you. If you choose another path, I will respect it. Destiny revealed you, but it will never take away your freedom." For the first time since leaving Ash Hollow, Aloan felt the weight she had carried for so many years begin to disappear. No one had ever asked what she wanted. No one had ever trusted her to choose her own future. As dawn's first light slowly touched the eastern horizon, the silver leaf rose gently from her satchel without anyone touching it. It floated above the crystal spring for several quiet moments before drifting toward the north, leaving behind a trail of shimmering light that stretched through the awakening forest. Kalen and Aloan exchanged one silent glance before beginning to follow it together, not because either of them had been ordered to do so, but because both of their hearts had freely chosen the same road. Morning sunlight poured through the restored branches of the sacred tree, bathing the entire sacred grove in gentle silver light unlike anything the wolves had seen for generations. The air itself seemed lighter. Crystal streams flowed freely once again around the ancient roots. Birds returned to branches abandoned many seasons before, and every breeze carried the quiet fragrance of blossoms that had not existed only moments earlier. Aloan stood beneath the vast silver canopy with one hand still resting lightly against the ancient bark. Around her, wolves from every neighboring pack remained silent, not because they had witnessed a miracle alone, but because each of them realized they had misunderstood greatness for far too long. The sacred tree had never searched for the strongest alpha, the oldest bloodline, or the loudest voice. It had patiently waited for a heart that chose kindness even when the world had answered it with rejection. Elder Bramwell slowly stepped forward, his carved staff shaking gently in his weathered hands. Pride had vanished from his face. Only humility remained. Before the eyes of every gathered pack, the elder who had once cast Eloan away lowered himself onto both knees and placed his staff upon the earth. "Eloan Ashcroft," he said quietly, his voice breaking beneath the weight of regret. "I believed I was protecting our traditions. Instead, I protected my own fear. I spent 40 years guarding this sacred tree while failing to recognize the one soul it had waited 8 centuries to welcome home. If forgiveness is beyond my reach, I will understand." Silence settled across the grove. Eloan looked at the elder who had once changed the course of her life with a single judgment. For a brief moment, she remembered standing before this very tree wearing the same simple gray dress, believing she had lost everything. Then another memory returned. A silver leaf drifting gently into her open palm. A quiet warmth beneath ancient bark. A whisper of hope she had almost ignored. She smiled softly. "Home is not the place where no one makes mistakes," she said. "Home is where people choose to become better after they finally see the truth." Tears appeared throughout the gathered crowd. One by one, wolves stepped forward, each quietly apologizing in their own way. Some bowed. Others simply lowered their heads. A young Omega embraced Eloan with trembling arms, remembering every silent moment she had failed to defend her friend. Even warriors known for courage found themselves unable to speak. Nearby, Chancellor Aldrin Whitlock watched with peaceful satisfaction. The 2 ancient oak tokens now rested within the sacred tree itself, glowing softly beneath the silver bark. He smiled toward Kalen. "For 60 years I searched old libraries believing I was preserving history," he murmured. "Today history finally remembered us." Kalen answered only with a grateful nod. Then, before every alpha, elder, and traveler gathered within the sacred grove, he slowly removed the royal crest that had rested around his neck since the day he became king. Fashioned from silver in the shape of a crescent wolf, it represented the authority of the northern crown. Instead of placing it upon Eloan, he gently set it at the foot of the sacred tree. A quiet murmur passed through the crowd. "A crown," Kalen said calmly, "exists to serve what is worthy. It does not make something worthy." He turned toward Eloan, meeting her gray-blue eyes with complete sincerity. "I crossed 3 kingdoms searching for the woman chosen by prophecy. Along the road, I discovered someone greater than any prophecy could describe." He extended his hand toward her, not as a command, not as a king, but simply as a man offering another traveler the freedom to choose her own future. Eloan smiled through grateful tears before placing her hand in his. At that very instant, the first silver leaf that had ever fallen into her palm gently rose from the branches above. It floated silently between them before drifting toward the place where she had stood on the morning she was cast away. The tiny leaf rested upon the same weathered stone where she had once whispered, "I suppose this is goodbye." Eloan followed it with her eyes until a quiet laugh escaped her lips. "I guess," she whispered, "it was never goodbye after all." As though answering her, the sacred tree released one final shower of shimmering silver leaves that danced through warm morning light before slowly covering the entire grove like peaceful starlight. High above the ancient branches, a single silver seed separated from the highest blossom and drifted upon the wind beyond the borders of Ash Hollow, carried across rivers, forests, and distant kingdoms. Chancellor Whitlock watched it disappear into the horizon and smiled knowingly. "Every age begins with a single seed," he whispered. Years later, mothers would tell their children that somewhere beyond the mountains another sacred tree had quietly taken root, not because kingdoms had grown stronger, but because one forgotten Omega had reminded the world that true strength had always been gentle. And whenever travelers paused beneath the great silver branches of Ash Hollow, they no longer remembered the day Eloan was rejected. They remembered the day kindness became the strongest law in every kingdom, and the day an Alpha King crossed 3 kingdoms only to discover that destiny had never been searching for a queen. It had been patiently waiting for a heart that never stopped choosing compassion.